Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Apalachicola-Chattahoochee-Flint River Basin Drought and Water webinar for the month of December. Thanks for joining us for our last webinar of 2020. My name is Rachel McGuire, and I am with the Auburn University Water Resources Center located in Auburn, Alabama. If you're new to this webinar, we'll have time at the end after all of our speakers for comments, question, and discussion. During the webinar, feel free to use the question box on the tool panel, and you can also raise your hand by pushing the hand icon on that same GoToMeeting tool panel. And for today's speakers, we have David Zierden, the Florida State Climatologist with the Florida Climate Center at Florida State University. We have Tom Littlepage, Branch Chief of the Alabama Office of Water Resources with the Alabama Department of Economic and Community Affairs. We have Paul Ankhorn, a hydrologist with the USGS South Atlantic Water Science Center. Jeff Dober of the NOAA National Weather Service's Southeast River Forecast Center, and Troy Ephraim of the Army Corps of Engineers Mobile District. Speakers, as a reminder, just give me a cue when you need your slides advanced. With that, I will start with our first speaker, David Zierden, for our current drought status and our seasonal forecasts and outlooks. Ready when you are, David.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much, Rachel. And as we begin this presentation, since not a lot is happening as far as drought goes across the Southeast, I thought I'd begin taking a look at some record and near record temperatures we've been experiencing this past fall, and also in 2020 in general, and even for the last 5 years. Over on the top left is the state-by-state historical ranking for average temperature for year to date, basically January through November. And what we see is every state in the lower 48 is running warmer than normal in 2020. Those in the darker orange are in the top 10 out of 126 years of data, where Florida, Virginia, and Delaware are all currently ranked as the warmest on record year to date, January through November. So we've certainly been experiencing some warmer than normal temperatures across Florida and much of the Southeast. But then this graph on the bottom is particularly striking. It is the Florida statewide average temperature smoothed with a 5-year running average. And what we see is over the last 5 years, average temperature across the state is now running a full 2 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than any other 5-year period in this 126-year historical record. So we've really had a rather, in climate terms, an abrupt shift to really warmer temperatures in all seasons of the year here in Florida and extending up through the Southeast. Some other tidbits. Out of the last 68 monthly average temperatures for the state of Florida, 65 of those have been warmer than average. Only 3 below average months in the last 5.5+ years. This includes the last 31 months in a row, again, over 2.5 years without a single month being colder than normal. 8 of our monthly records were set during this last 5-year period, and it has been the case over the last 5 to 10 years. It's the overnight minimum temperatures that seem to be affected more than the daytime highs. And on the next slide, we'll take a little closer look at this. First, this is kind of the same information. This is by county division, the 5-year running average of temperatures across the United States. And as you see, everywhere in red is where this last 5-year period is by far the warmest on record. So it's not just Florida. It extends through all of the Southeast United States and Texas and even up into the Northeast. So on the next slide, we'll take a little closer look at this. And now we'll look station by station at daily average temperature for the month of November, for the fall season, September through November in the middle, and year to date over on the far right. And if we look at the month of November, there are a few #1 rankings or stations with their warmest year to date on record. They include Dothan, Alabama, and Crestview, Florida, even Lumberton, North Carolina. But throughout the Southeast, we see 2s, 3s, and 4s and 5s, where they're all in their top 5 warmest Novembers on record. If we look at the fall season as a whole, we now see a lot more #1 rankings, especially throughout the peninsula of Florida, but also extending up into southern Alabama, southern Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, and up into the coastal Carolinas. And if we look at year to date, then we see even more #1 rankings, especially in the state of Florida, but extending all through the Southeast, even up into the Outer Banks of North Carolina and beyond. So back at the end of November, I was fairly certain that Florida would break its record as far as calendar year average temperatures. But in the spirit of full disclosure, we'll go to the next slide. Well, before I go there, let's just take a look at when we separate out the daily maximum temperatures with the daily overnight minimum temperatures on the right, you really see this stark difference. And this is for the fall season as a whole, September through November. The temperature anomalies for maximum temperature are anywhere from 1 to 3 degrees, pretty consistent across the whole Southeast United States. But if we look at the overnight minimum temperatures, now the anomalies are 4 to 6 to even 8 degrees above normal for the fall season. So this just continues a trend we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years or so, where it's really the overnight low temperatures that are driving this warming spell, along with daily highs, but we're seeing much more departures from normal in the overnight minimums. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. And in the spirit of full disclosure, we've had a pattern shift since the 1st of December, where especially Florida, but much of the Southeast has been running colder than normal for the past 2 weeks. And here you see, this is again, daily average temperature, departures from normal of anywhere from 4 to 6 to even 7 degrees below normal so far for the month of December. And I'm not sure I would call it a cause, but to go along with that, we have been in a very negative phase of the Arctic Oscillation, or another aspect of it is the North Atlantic Oscillation, where this negative phase of this climate oscillation in the high latitudes is very well associated with winter storminess along the East Coast and New England, and colder than normal temperatures in Florida. And this is especially true in the record-setting winter of 2010, when we had an extended period of negative AO and record-setting cold temperatures January through March of 2010. And then again, the following winter in December of 2010, we had the same very negative NAO, and again, very, very cold temperatures. So again, this Arctic Oscillation or North Atlantic Oscillation, in my mind, is more of an indicator of the large-scale circulation pattern across North America, not necessarily a driver. So we got to kind of keep that in mind and know that this can change in just a period of a week or two. So with that, we'll go ahead and switch gears and start looking at the drought situation. This is the current U.S. drought monitor, and we see now that area of abnormally dry, or D0, in eastern Georgia has been quite persistent and is expanding. We also see patches starting to appear in southwest Georgia, southern Alabama, and it looks likely that these will continue to expand as we go into the winter. So this is still just abnormally dry. It's not drought, but these are areas to watch, as if the La Nina conditions kick in and kind of override this negative NAO, we could start to see some spread and intensification of drought. So we'll go ahead and start looking at some of our indicators. And this is the Lawn and Garden Moisture Index from University of Alabama, Huntsville. And with the exception of North Florida and the Big Bend area, it looks pretty green or pretty moist across all of the ACF basin. But also keep in mind that as we get into the winter period where evapotranspiration rates are much lower, the amount of precipitation that kind of drives this index drops nearly in half, as you see with this graph on the right. So during the winter months, it's not quite as sensitive to periods without rainfall as it is during the summer months. So we'll have to keep that in mind. On the next slide, we'll start taking a look at recent rainfall. And these are the radar-derived estimates from the last 7 days, where we see only a trace of rainfall of a few hundredths or tenths of an inch across the lower and middle ACF basin. As we get up into the northern half of Alabama and northwest Georgia, we see higher amounts, anywhere from a half an inch to 1.5 to 2 inches, but only a little bit of excess rainfall in the headwaters and Lake Lanier region. Most of the ACF has been relatively dry over the last 7 days. On the next slide, we'll take a look a little further back, and it's kind of the same pattern. Here in especially the lower ACF basin, the 30-day totals are only around 1.5 to 2 to 3 inches of rainfall over the last 30 days. But we do see higher amounts across the middle ACF basin, central Alabama, north central Georgia, of 4 to 5 to 6 inches. So a little more in the upper reaches of the ACF basin, a little bit less rainfall in the lower basin. On the next slide, we'll take a look at, now we're looking at the departures from normal, or deficits, if you will. And if we look back 90 days, we see that almost the entire ACF basin is really running above normal in the 90-day period, maybe the exception of the estuary of the Apalachicola Bay down in Franklin County, Florida, but the rest of it is really above normal over the last 90 days. And we're actually cycling out of the rainfall that the Panhandle saw from Hurricane Sally. So this is just a continuation of the wet pattern that we had through the summer and well into the fall. So on the next slide, we'll start taking a look ahead, and this is the 7-day quantitative precipitation forecast from the National Weather Service. And we're in a kind of an unsettled pattern. We should have a low pressure system tracking along the northern Gulf Coast tomorrow that will bring some rainfall, especially to the Florida Panhandle and lower ACF. And then that same low pressure system is going to make its way up to New England, where it's quite a snow and winter storm event is forecast for tomorrow and Thursday. There's also another Gulf low that may come together early next week that we'll have to keep an eye on. But meanwhile, in the middle and upper ACF, more seasonal amounts of rainfall in the next 7 days. So on the next slide, we'll start taking a look at the seasonal forecast and the state of the Pacific Ocean. Just like our last webinar, we are still well in the La Nina phase, with colder than normal sea surface temperatures across most of the equatorial Pacific Ocean, as you can see in this satellite graphic of sea surface temperature anomalies. A very mature La Nina event, looking at the Nino 3.4 index, we've risen above that negative 1.5 threshold for a strong La Nina, but I would still characterize it as moderate to strong. And on the next slide, we'll see, because there's such a well-developed La Nina in place, there's nearly a 100% chance that it will continue through the winter months, December, January, and February. And then it is forecast to begin decaying as we get into the spring. As we get into the March, April, May season, we're down to a 65% chance of still being in La Nina conditions. So it's going to stick around at least through the middle of the spring, and it will be a player in our spring climate patterns, which can really be critical for setting up more intensification of drought in the southeast. And over on the right just shows the model predictions, and the ensemble average shows just what I said, kind of sea surface temperatures warming as we get into the spring and summer. So on the next slide, we showed this last time, quick review. This is the kind of our conceptual model of the overriding jet stream patterns during La Nina episodes. Usually leaves the southeast, the northern Gulf Coast, the state of Florida drier than normal. Over on the left is the cold season, November through March, precipitation anomalies during strong La Nina events. And you see very strong negative or dry anomalies across the middle and lower ACF, the state of Florida, Texas, really the whole southern tier of the United States. So with that, we'll take a look at the Climate Prediction Center's 3-month outlook for December, January, and February. Over on the right is the precipitation outlook with the exact same pattern I showed as with that composite on the previous slide. Greatly increased chances of below normal rainfall across the southern US, Texas, New Mexico, the northern Gulf Coast, the state of Florida, and also along with that, warmer than normal temperatures are favored again across the entire southern United States. And so with this moderate to strong La Nina in place and this kind of seasonal outlook, the US drought outlook, the seasonal drought outlook is calling for drought development to be likely across the middle and lower ACF and the northern Gulf Coast, kind of the same area where we're seeing D0 or abnormally dry pop up on the drought monitor. And with the seasonal forecast as it is, it's likely that drought will continue to pop up and maybe develop further as we go into the spring months. So with that, I'll go ahead and summarize. Florida and the Southeast are in the midst of a sharp warming trend over the last 5 to 10 years, with nighttime temperatures being affected more than daytime highs. We are seeing record heat in the fall of 2020 in the state of Florida, and also year to date for much of Florida, the coastal Carolinas, the Outer Banks. Abnormally dry conditions persist over eastern Georgia, other patches developing over South Alabama and Southwest Georgia, and even North Florida. Some dryness over the middle and lower ACF basin at 30 to 60 days, but at 90 days, most of the basin is above normal to well above normal over the past 3 months as far as rainfall. Looking at the forecast, an active pattern to bring more rainfall to the lower ACF in the next couple days and maybe early next week. We are still in a La Nina advisory, 100% chance of it continuing through the winter months and 65% chance through spring. And with that, the CPC seasonal forecast pretty strongly favors above normal temperatures and below normal rainfall. And drought could still develop late in the winter, early spring as the La Nina kind of takes over and plays out.
Thank you, David. Now I'll turn it over to Tom Littlepage with an update from the state of Alabama. Ready when you are, Tom.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. So basically, we're going to continue with the theme that we have seen for the last 2 to 3 months. This is a depiction of the drought monitor for last week. Next slide. And you can see that basically it's a replication of where we've not seen precipitation. This is a slide, and David showed some similar information, but this is just since October 1st, the beginning of the water year. And you see how the drought monitor is driven by the lack of precipitation in the southern part of the state. And the challenge in that area of the state is there's not a lot of reservoirs. There's not a lot of regulated gauges or river systems in there. So as David has alluded to, one of the key issues for us as we get into looking at the impacts of La Nina over the next 2 to 3 months is how it may impact ag for one sector in that southern part of the state. Next slide. But as we continue to monitor, we have not changed our statewide drought declaration. Next slide. But we are continuing to update the information that's on our drought website, and I would point you to the drought GIS portal, the third bullet in that list there. That contains streamflow information that we update on a weekly basis. Next slide. So essentially, short and quick, is we're continuing to look at conditions, and they have continued to follow a typical La Nina pattern where we see the southern part of the state suffer from below normal precipitation. At this point, it's been relatively minor. But again, as David alluded to, the outlooks continue to emphasize a relatively strong La Nina. And one of the things that we have consistently heard from David and John Christie and others is that the impact of the La Nina is the most severe in that spring, early summer timeframe. So that's something we're watching very carefully, and we will continue to assess impacts on that. But at this point, we're not getting any reports of anybody having any issues or over concerns right now, but we're continuing to watch it. Last slide. And so as a result of that, we're not pulling folks together until we see a strong need to have more definitive information relative to both impacts and forecasts and how they're going to impact various sectors. So that's all I got.
Thanks, Tom. Now I'll turn it over to Paul Inkhorn with our stream flows and groundwater conditions.
Hi, Rachel. Good afternoon, everybody. As we usually do, let's begin by looking at real-time stream flow across the southeast here. So the image on the right is current as I pulled this morning, but you can clearly see a band across central and northern Alabama extending up through North Georgia into the Carolinas, where conditions are much above normal, as indicated by the blue dots. And then as we move further south through the basin and through the southeast, conditions become more normal for this time of year. So that's to be expected. A few stations showing up as below normal, but that's likely due to regulation and so forth. So we'll move to the next slide and look at, this is the below normal 7-day average stream flow. So this is an indication of relative hydrologic drought, and the ACF Basin is currently ranked, as normal. We're not seeing any dry conditions. The most current condition set is the map on the bottom, and then you can see just an area in eastern Georgia, Algeechee, that is ranking below normal. But in western Alabama, there's a small area that's showing extreme hydrologic drought. I didn't really drill into this too far. It looks to be the Tom Bigby, but from our previous presenters, we're not seeing any deficit in rainfall in that area. No abnormal soil moisture conditions. I believe this just to be an anomaly at this time, and not really anything of any major concern. But I did just want to point that out. Okay, we'll move on to the next slide. So we begin here by looking at the 28-day average stream flow. So this is the previous 28 days average stream flow for each station. That's indicated with the solid black bold line there, and then the daily flow for each day for the period of record is ranked accordingly. And so this just gives an indication of the current trend that we're seeing at each gauge station here. So these two are Lake Lanier inflows, and you can see basically we were still ranking above normal, trending slightly back towards normal conditions. So Cornelia and Lanier, both 28-day average stream flow right now is right at the 70th percentile or approaching. So higher than normal flow there for Lake Lanier inflows. Next slide, these are stations below. So this is really indicative of what's coming out of Lanier. So Chattahoochee River at Atlanta and Whitesburg, we're seeing a slight, downward trend in 28-day average flow, and both stations are approaching the 75th percentile. All right, next slide. We shall move further downstream to West Point in Columbus. So there, the flows are pretty much just holding. They're well into above normal. And so we expect 28-day average flow there to start decreasing as flow moves downstream. So, all right, next slide. We'll switch over to Flint River. So since our last webinar, the Flint, both these stations here have seen an increase in 28-day average. So we moved from where we were last webinar, right at the, ranked at normal. We have increased there to above normal 28-day flow conditions. So next slide, we shall move further downstream to Albany and Bainbridge. Both sites there are hovering right around the 75th percentile. So between normal and above normal. And then the last slide, as far as stream flow goes, this is Apalachicola River at Chattahoochee. And again, there we're seeing 28-day average flow right on the border between 75th, 76th percentile, between normal and above normal. All right, so that stream flow looking pretty good. Real-time groundwater conditions. So not a lot of change from our last webinar. Groundwater conditions ranking anywhere from above normal to much below normal. Last webinar, our two indicator wells there were both at above normal. You can see on the right, as they're circled, now they've both moved into below normal conditions. So let's take a look at Miller County. So the graph on the right is the previous 7 days. So this is depth below land surface. So just want to point out, that purple or pink triangle there is an observed observation. So that's just basically to check that the instrument is recording correctly to datum. So a little bit of fluctuation over the past 7 days, but we'll move to the right graphic, which is more of a long term. That's the daily average. So since September, we've been seeing slight decline, but that's expected for this time of year. So that declining trend there is moving right towards the 50th percentile, so well within normal conditions. Next slide. Same situation there for Dougherty County, slight reduction or downward trend in groundwater elevation, but there it's a little higher, right at around the 70th percentile, but again, well within to normal conditions. So groundwater looks good as well across the basin. All right, the last slide, we'll just summarize. So real-time stream flow currently ranking from high to below normal range, just a couple of stations showing below normal, but as a whole, most stations are reporting normal. No portions of the ACF currently ranked as below normal for the 7-day average stream flow. 28-day average stream flow for Chattahoochee currently ranks in the above normal range, and Flint River is ranking from normal to below normal for the 28-day average stream flow, and then real-time groundwater levels across the basin range from above normal to much below normal. And like I pointed out, most of the stations are shown to be in the normal range. So that concludes it, Rachel. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Now I'll turn it over to Troy Ephraim with our ACF reservoir conditions when you're ready, Troy.
Hey, Rachel, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, great. All right, we'll start at Lake Lanier, and we had a midnight pool elevation of 1070.5 and a 10-day forecast of 1070.46. And right now we're operating just slightly above guide curve, and we plan to be there over the next few weeks. Next slide. Moving down to West Point, the midnight pool elevation was 628.46. And our 10-day forecast, 628.31. And the same as with Lake Lanier, we're operating just slightly above guide curve, and we'll be there over the next few weeks. At Waterf George, we have a pink dotted line that's in there that represents our drawdown from earlier this year. And it was just included to show how we were able to follow the projected lowering of the reservoir for the dam repairs. And our midnight pool elevation at George was 188.77. And our 10-day forecast was 188.41. And right now we're just slightly above winter guide curve, and we expect to be closer over the next few weeks. Down to Jim Woodruff and Lake Seminole, the midnight pool elevation 76.92. And our 10-day forecast 77.25. And next slide is the ACF Basin composite conservation and flood storage. And right now we're operating in zone 1, and we plan to remain in zone 1 over the next 5 weeks. And in summary, as Paul mentioned just before, the inflows into the projects we're seeing either normal or above normal. Lake Lanier, West Point, and George are transitioning to the winter guide curve, and they're currently operating slightly above winter pool elevations. And for the ACF system conservation storage, it's currently in zone 1, and it's forecasted to remain in zone 1 for the next few weeks.
Thank you, Troy. And now we'll finish things up with Jeff Dover with our streamflow forecast. When you're ready, Jeff.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. So we're going to introduce the new slide here beyond the other 2 slides that we typically show. These are 10-day streamflow forecasts, and these are our what we call our MMEFS, our ensemble forecasts. If you're interested in seeing more about the ensemble forecast, all you got to do is Google MMEFS. And these are a 10-day forecast, and they're driven by the GFS meteorological model. And I thought I'd start to share these. Again, they're 10-day forecasts, and you can see the flows here, starting at Lake Lanier. And these are the projected inflows into the lake. And as you can see, we are with the rain just the other day, and another little event coming through late tonight. You can see a couple of little bumps there, but then for the most part, we're going to be remaining around 2,000, 3,000 CFS inflows into the lake. You can see some of the outliers there, but it's really the orange shaded area that is the most likely range that the ensembles are providing. So Lake Lanier, you can see relatively flat over the next 10 days. And I was looking at them as well from this morning, and the forecast from this morning, and it shows this continued trend of we're really not expecting any significant flow events as of right now through the next 10 days. So you see there at Chattahoochee River near Whitesburg, the flows remaining relatively flat and below what they will be over the next few days. Then you go down to Albany there, and that's on the lower Flint, and again showing much of the same, as well as Bluntstown on the Apalachicola River. And so right now it doesn't look like any potential flooding as well. looking at the thresholds that we have on the graphs as well. So I'll start to begin to maybe start showing those, and that'll lead into our next slide, which is our 1 month projection. And this is the continued trend. So toward near normal. So Paul was showing how the stream flows or the 28-day averages are running around just in that above normal range. And stream flows, they've actually, through mid-January, they may not be much less than where we're at now, but the fact that the normal ranges are increasing as we head into January in our primary recharge period, that'll just more or less give us a better chance of being in the normal stream flow condition. And that leads us into our 3-month forecast, which will take us now into February, mid-February. And our pie charts from ESP, as well as some of our other tools, are showing the highest probabilities now in the normal range, which would, you know, probably the second largest piece of the pie showing above normal, with right now, not much chance at below normal. I think this is heavily weighted again on our current conditions. But with the La Nina projections, we'll probably continue to see a drying trend. And as mentioned before, this drying trend is probably going to be seen more after the first of the year rather than through the rest of the month, and probably the early part of January. Probably we'll see more of a drying trend in late January and in February from what we've been seeing. And so overall, I think over the next 3 months, we will see this trend into the normal range through mid-February. So that's all I have from Southeast River Forecast Center. So just in summary, the 10-day stream flow forecast, no large flow events expected as of right now. 1 month stream flow forecast is for near normal, as well as our 3-month stream flow forecasts will be near normal. Now, again, our normals, they increase as we go into the primary recharge period. So that doesn't necessarily mean that we'll see stream flows dramatically come down. It just means what will be more normal for that time of year. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. And looking ahead to 2021, Meredith Muth of NIDIS had a few comments for the group when you're ready, Meredith.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel, and thanks as always to our outstanding presenters. I really appreciate seeing some of these new tools and graphics. Just 3 quick things. Number 1, our next webinar will include a special topic on some research related to drought monitoring in the ACF. We are going to move forward in this webinar series with having occasional special interest presentations. This was based on feedback in the survey and in talking to many of you on a regular basis. If you have specific topics you'd like to learn more about, for example, maybe a walkthrough tutorial on some of the new products out of the River Forecast Center, please let us know. The second item is many of you have participated earlier this year in some listening sessions to inform a new information portal, the ACF Drought Dashboard. The origin of this product came out of discussions with the broader community in the ACF under the drought early warning systems, where there is a desire to make information all in one place and more accessible to inform drought planning and preparedness. And so based on 4 listening sessions that were held earlier this year, it was decided that there was really no one way to meet everyone's needs. And so we're thinking outside the box and working on a prototype, we being Auburn University, as well as Albany State University, working with the NOAA National Centers for Environmental Information and NIDIS to create a landing page for this drought dashboard that would include a number of different items that I have listed here. So it will include a little bit more context on why drought matters in the ACF through a story map. We'll have some separate links and information and tools for looking at current conditions, including at your zip code level, all the way up to the watershed level. We'll include some information on drought outlooks, some more technical tools using Climate Engine to really delve into the different layers and drought indicators. And then finally, a easy to access drought resources for the ACF. So we're working on this prototype. We just wanted to give you a heads up that that information provided earlier this year was incredibly helpful when working through it, and we hope to have a prototype to share in the spring. And in addition, the new drought.gov site will also be released soon in January. And maybe we'll spend a little bit of time, a few minutes next month, walking through that as well, Rachel, just to introduce people to a new drought resource that might be helpful. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Meredith. Yeah, that'd be great to go through some of what the new drought.gov will have to offer, especially since we'll be meeting the last few days of January for the next webinar. So now I want to open it up to any questions or items of discussion anyone may have for any of our speakers. I don't see any questions coming in, but Jeff, we did have a great suggestion that for those 10-day streamflow forecasts, maybe break them up to each of their own slides or just get them a little bit bigger. It was a lot to take in. They're a little bit small in those slides. So you and I can work together on that if we're going to start showing those each month next year.
Sure, absolutely. We can do that.
And thank you for including that. That's great information. So if we don't have any questions coming in, I want to take a moment to thank our speakers. I think that we've had a great year for the webinar, certainly. Already having this format down for 2020 is something I think everyone is more familiar with at this point. But thank you to David Searden, Tom Littlepage, Paul Ankhorn, Troy Ephraim, Jeff Dober, and Meredith Muth for giving us updates from NIDIS. Our next webinar will be Tuesday, January 26th, 2021, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central. A video recording of this webinar will be posted online to the NIDIS YouTube channel. There will also be a link to this recording in a summary email with content from today that you will receive within 24 to 48 hours. As always, if you ever have any questions or comments, feel free to contact me. My contact information is on the bottom left currently. And thank you for everyone attending today. Have a great day and happy holidays.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Rachel.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yeah, happy holidays. Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas.